I'll just introduce Sahana to the participants. So Sahana Singh is an author, speaker, researcher, and an index scholar. She is based in Ithaca, New York, in the United States. With a professional background in environmental engineering, she brings a unique perspective to her writing with a grasp of diverse subjects such as Indian history, water management, and education. Her first book, The Educational Heritage of Ancient India, How an Ecosystem of Learning Was Laid to Waste, has been appreciated for awakening Indians to the role played by India in spreading knowledge around the world. Building on the success of her first book, Sahana's second work, Revisiting the Educational Heritage of India, published by Ithaca, offers a deeper exploration into India's distinctive ecosystem of learning. She's passionate about traveling and connecting the dots across different societies, civilizations, and disciplines. She's going to talk to us on a very interesting topic, the Gurukula system behind India's mathematical heritage. Can't wait, Sahana. Thank you so much and welcome again.
So YouTube is on, right? So
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Swati ji. Namaste, namaskar to everyone. It's such a big privilege for me to be addressing all of you who are delving so deep into India's mathematics heritage. So that is why I decided to speak about the Gurukula system, the educational system, which gave us all this mathematics that we are studying. And that's what I have been exploring from the past many years, looking into what was that ecosystem of learning, what was that educational system which gave us all these gems in different disciplines, not just mathematics. So I'm going to share my screen and share my PowerPoint. Okay. Just give me a heads up that you're able to see this.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to be talking about the Gurukula system behind India's mathematics heritage. The Gurukula, as most of you would know, was a system of education where there is a guru who is the teacher, but beyond a teacher, actually. The word guru is very deep. And so the guru teaches, and then the students are living with the guru and they are learning different disciplines. So that is the system that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. So India had a very ancient tradition of formal discipline teaching and learning that attracted students from around the world to India. So we have lots of records of foreign students coming from China, coming from the Asia, the Eastern Asia, coming from Western Asia, to study, to sit at the feet of the gurus of India and learn from them. So we have records of what they copied, what the manuscripts that they copied and they translated into different languages. So this was an ancient tradition. So we had forest universities. Long before we had the universities made of bricks and mortar, we had forest universities where you hardly needed anything. You just needed a forest with trees under which people could sit. And in fact, you could have one department under one tree and another department under another tree. So there's a guru teaching under one tree and surrounded by students, and a little away, there's another tree under which another guru is teaching another subject. So and there would be many of them, and then there would be a presiding guru who is looking into what is being taught by all these gurus. So you could very well call them forest universities. And they taught math, science, astronomy, prosody, literature, etymology, and what have you, a variety of subjects. Later on, these universities, which were in the forest, were, they started building structures. So we had structures like, so we had Nalanda universities, Takshashila universities. A lot of us have heard of those big universities, but they all started in the forest. And even when we had those brick and mortar structures for halls, where classes could be held, people would still prefer the outdoors. So there would be lots and lots of classes held under the trees, because most of these universities were situated in beautiful green environs. Now, there were significant rites of passage that were conducted to mark educational milestones of starting one's education and graduating in a sacred way. So we had ceremonies like Vidyarambha, and I think I have a picture of it coming up next. Yes. So this is a picture of Hate Khodi ceremony, which is performed even today in Bengal. And in other parts of India, it's called Vidyarambha. And this is when the child learns to trace alphabets for the first time. And this would be an important ceremony. Guests would be invited and they would all look at, they will rejoice that now the child is old enough to write alphabets. Then there was another ceremony, which was a milestone ceremony when the child would graduate into higher learning. I mean, move on to higher learning. And that was called Upanayana, the sacred thread ceremony, where after this ceremony, the student would go and live with the guru in the Gurukula, live for maybe 8 years or 12 years, depending on how long the student wants to learn, and gain a mastery over different subjects. So this was the ceremony that led to that period of education. And again, it was a huge ceremony. A lot of people would be invited. And there were some very poignant ceremonies in this as a part of this, where the child would take leave of the mother and the mother would feed him with her hands for the last time and then give him that staff which he has to carry with him as he goes on to learn under the guru. So the teacher was the most important person in ancient Indian society, the teacher. So, the status given to the teacher is just unbelievable, because today we don't, it was eroded quite a bit. We do see remnants of it, but what it was in those times was something different. So the scholars were freed from the burden of earning a livelihood, because the entire society would provide financial and personal support. So donations would be given to teachers and educational institutions, and these donations were given a high order of merit, because those who gave who contributed to educational institutions would earn merit in society. They would be respected for supporting education. Now, the guru, again, as I told you, was beyond the teacher, because the teacher is just teaching a subject. He's a subject matter expert who is teaching something. But the guru was like embodied knowledge, a walking, talking book with whom the students would live. And just by being with the guru, talking to the guru, they would learn so much. They could ask any question and the guru would answer them, or the guru would give them a task to do which would make them understand it. So this was experiential learning of the highest order. And very often direct answers were not given by the teacher to the guru, because giving direct answers means that the child will not probably retain it. And so the student would arrive at the answers by doing some task that the guru would give. So this was experiential learning. And there was also the concept of lower education and higher education. Okay. Again, lower not being demeaning. So what was the purpose of higher education? Radha Kumud Mukherjee has written a book in which he's given a very beautiful definition. He said, the material and the moral, the physical and the spiritual, the perishable and the permanent, all these things were the purpose of higher education. Okay. And there is also this famous phrase from Vishnu Purana which says, Sa Vidya Ya Vimuktaye. So that is knowledge which liberates. So higher education had this purpose of liberating the student from the shackles of attachments and learning the higher truths. So just to tell you a little bit about the distinction between higher and lower education. So higher education dealt with greater self-awareness, a higher state of consciousness, a deep immersion into the Vedas, because the Veda, as you know about Vedic mathematics that you are discussing, everything, all knowledge came from the Veda. And I think only about 5% of the population was engaged in this higher knowledge, because not everybody needed to go into those higher states. Most people went for skill-based education, worldly education, which needed a basic understanding of the Veda. So people would actually know what is the basic thing in the Veda, because that would be reflected in all the other skills as well. And 95% of the population were engaged in learning skills from which they could earn revenues. So as I said, lower education didn't mean lower in a demeaning way. It just meant in the material sense, it was lower. Now here is a picture that, this is what I plotted, and this is my book. If you get a hold of my book, you will find this map, which shows you the different centers of higher learning in India. Not all at the same time. They didn't exist at the same time. They were in different time periods. But most of us simply know Nalanda, Vikramshila, and Takshashila universities. So when I did my research, I was quite astounded to find that there were so many universities in ancient times. And so we see a cluster of universities on the eastern part of India. And here, this is where you see Nalanda, Vikramshila, Jagadala. These are the ones which are very well known. And these had a lot of, these universities were very well funded with revenues coming from the villages around them. And then in the north, we had Sharda Peeth in Kashmir. So Kashmir in those days was known as Sharda Desh, and Sharda, as you would know, is the goddess of learning. Saraswati's other name is Sharda. So in Kashmir, there was Sharda Peeth, which was a temple university. So we, apart from the forest university model, we had the temple university model. And that is exactly what you find in southern India as well. All these universities in the southern part of India, a lot of them were temple universities. So there would be a temple where people would go to worship, but then there would be an annex to the temple where classes could be held. And of course, the outdoors, under the trees, you could always use those spaces as well. So because learning was sacred, knowledge was sacred, temples were very good places to study. And all the guests who were visiting would be asked to give a lecture, which the students would attend. Now, there were four main attributes of ancient Indian education that I could classify. I found that they were always nature-centric. Nature-centric, they were interdisciplinary, they were holistic, and purposeful, not arbitrary. So these are the four main attributes that I could isolate, and I just want to give a little bit more detail about them. Attribute number one, nature-centric. So nature was not, they were taught in the midst of nature, but nature herself was an important teacher and would guide countless discoveries towards higher truths by observations. So for example, students who were asked to take cows out for grazing, all these were tasks for students to do within the Gurukula. So the guru would ask some students to go and take the cows out to graze. So that would take a whole day of being outdoors and ensuring that the cows are herded together after they have finished grazing, bringing them back home. And so there were other things that were being taught apart from academic subjects. So taking the cows out to graze, bringing water from the well, many students would have to do this, or there would be a rotation. Some students would do it at one time, another would do another time. And they would also observe the changing seasons, which would give them a lot of insights. But just because, if you just, instead of giving a classroom experience, just by being in the midst of nature, watching how the seasons change, how the vegetation changes, how the animals behave in different seasons, all this was part of learning. Watching the germination of a seed, seeing how that seed that has been planted, how it grows into a bigger plant. Then elements of nature was studied in great detail, and environmental sustainability was built into all the disciplines. So the students would know about soil health, they would know about rainwater harvesting and water catchments. They would look at the sky, the celestial phenomena in the sky, and know about eclipses and so on. So astronomical knowledge also was given to them through these outings. Zoology and botany, of course. So in this way, being nature-centric was helpful in giving the students a lot of knowledge that would not be in the books. Now, to give you an example, there is this famous story from the Chandogya Upanishad, where there is a student called Swetaketu who has been asked by the guru, his father, to bring some seeds, to bring some seeds and look into the seeds and tell what is inside the seed. And the student is saying that I do not see anything inside the seed of the Nyagarodha tree, the banyan tree. And then the guru is now prompting him to go deeper and deeper into what is inside the seed. So he's saying in that invisibility exists the tree, but the tree emerges from the seed and manifests only when it is pushed by the subtle energy that you cannot see. And it is the same subtle energy that is in all the living beings. So in this way, by being in the midst of nature, these higher truths would be evident to the students by the conversations they had with the guru. The second attribute that I mentioned, interdisciplinary, this was very, very, very important because students would not be confined to just one subject. And there is this famous quote from Charaka Samhita, Ekam Shastra Madhyano. So in it's the two-line quote, in which it says, a physician who has learned one science only cannot be sure of his own science, in this case, Ayurveda. And for this reason, the physician has to be versed in many sciences. So here, the student is being told that don't just confine yourself to your area of interest. try and learn about other things as well, because that will improve your understanding of your own area of interest. So this is very important. The third attribute was that education was very holistic. There was no artificial barrier between art, math, and religion. So if you look into it, you will see that students are being taught how to calculate the sun's distance from the earth, which is, of course, math. But then for the same sun, they are composing beautiful poetry to codify scientific insights. And then they would also worship the sun as a divine entity. So every morning they would wake up and worship the sun. So worshipping the sun as a divine entity did not interfere with looking at the sun as a physical entity from which you have to calculate the distance from the earth, right? So poetry is being composed for the sun, but at the same time, they are using math to calculate the distance. A case in point is Bhaskaracharya, who is one of the world's greatest mathematicians. He infused so much of poetry and charm into mathematics. And I saw Swatiji mentioning that Leelavati would soon be taught. Leelavati was one of those compositions of Bhaskaracharya, where he has given the mathematics problems in the form of poetry. So you would appreciate it for its poetry, but you would also look at it as a mathematical problem or a formula. That brings me into how they blended the sacred and the rational. So geometry was used to build accurate altars for yagyas, fire ceremonies called yagyas, and yantras. Yantras are sacred diagrams that are drawn at the time of these fire rituals. So this would bring in the knowledge of geometry. And so here is an example of how they're worshipping, but they're also using geometry in the process. So astronomy and trigonometry were used to calculate auspicious timings for the ritual. So most of these rituals were held at auspicious times, right? They would not happen during, when the planets are occulting. They would not happen at those times. So they needed to know where the stars are, where the planets are at the time of these ceremonies. So in this way, the sacred and the rational were blended. And you can contrast this with Europe, where there was a lot of religious opposition to scientific thought. In the case of India, it was the people of religion, or the people who were into all these ceremonies, religious ceremonies. They were the ones who were dealing with complicated mathematics and science. It was only during the Age of Enlightenment that the Western world achieved freedom from religious dominance. But in India, there never was really a fight between the sacred and the rational. And just to give you a few examples, you might already know about this. The number 108 is very auspicious in India, for the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jains. So there are 108 beads in the Japamala, the rosary, the rosary beads, there will be 108 beads in them. And in so many in the puja that we do, the prayers that we do, 108 is considered lucky. You should be chanting it 108 times. Then when Surya Namaskara, the yoga asana, when it is performed, people try to do it 108 times on special days. Then if you look at the dance form called Bharatanatyam, there are 108 dance poses. So there is this number 108, which is very auspicious. It comes again and again as you traverse through Indian culture. And I was very astonished to find that there was actually a real significance behind it. It is not some superstition. So Dr. Subhash Kak did some research and found that 108 is actually the ratio of the diameter of the sun and the diameter of the earth, approximately. I mean, it's not exactly 108. I think it's about 109 today. And there might have been some point of time when it was exactly 108. I'm not sure. But it's around between 108 and 107 and 109, I think. So the distance between the earth and the sun, the ratio of the distance between the distance between earth and sun and the diameter of the sun is 108. And thirdly, the distance between the earth and the moon, the ratio of that with the diameter of the moon is 108. So this 108 keeps coming again and again. And Dr. Kak wondered whether it was this astronomical fact that led to people recognizing that this is a magic number, and that is the number of times we should be doing things in our daily life. Attribute number 4 was that the education was purposeful, not arbitrary. And just to give you a simple example of the scientific approach that was taken to everything, let us look at how the alphabets were arranged in Sanskrit. So it was not random like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. It was not just some random arrangement that you had to learn. It was like according to where it is pronounced, where the points from where the sound emanates from your mouth. That is how it was arranged. So it was phonetic. K, K, G, G, Ng was called this row of alphabets came from the throat, kanthya. Ch, ch, j, j, nya came from a little bit higher up in the neck. And then you had t, t, d, d, n, which comes closer to the palate. Okay. That is the palatals. They're called the palatals in English. Then th, th, d, th, n require the teeth. You need the teeth while pronouncing these alphabets. So you can see that all of them, the way we learned the alphabets in India was according to where they were pronounced. And so there was a scientific basis to it. P, P, B, B, M use the lips to pronounce. Now, in mathematics also, there was a multi-dimensional understanding of mathematics. So when we look at how the Greeks and Babylonians understood mathematics, you will see that math for them was mainly geometrical. So geometry, it included the understanding of length, breadth, volume, diameter, circumference. It was mainly geometry. But with the Indians, they looked at numbers in different ways. So there was an understanding of geometry, arithmetic, algebra. All these three came together. And they visualized abstract entities such as zero. That the unknown entity was called Yavatavat, and it was represented as Y, while calculating the unknown entity, which later became X in European mathematics. The Arabs took this knowledge from India, and then later it moved to Europe. If you go and look into the history of how mathematics was transmitted to the Western world, you will see that the Arabs played an important role in learning from the Indians, and then later that was translated into Latin. But the difference between what they learned and what came from the source in India was that the Arabs rejected negative numbers. They thought the negative numbers, because you cannot see negative numbers, they rejected them. And even in Europe, initially, there was this concept of infidel numbers because it came from the infidels. And zero also was rejected for quite some time. Now, just to give you an idea of the pedagogy of how they were learning different things in India, because we really don't have books on pedagogy, which tell us how math was being taught or how astronomy was being taught. We can only just infer from these stories that have come down to us. So the French astronomer Le Gentil in the 18th century was traveling around the world and observing the transit of Venus. And this was all to calculate the distance between the sun and the earth. And when he visited India, he had heard a lot about the Indian methods of calculation, and he really wanted to learn from the Indians. But he was most perplexed when he saw that the way they did their math was so different. And he actually got a Brahmin scholar to come and sit in front of him and show how he calculated the timings of the eclipse. And so he found that the Brahmin man was chanting some verses. He was moving the shells, cowrie shells, the seashells, moving them around on the floor. And then he was chanting something and he was looking at some small book, but there were no tables over there. And he was just looking into a small book briefly and very quickly calculating the timings of the upcoming eclipses. So Le Gentil appreciated the speed with which the Brahmin did the calculations without any mistakes, and also his calm, unflappable demeanor, because he was wondering, how is he not getting flustered when he's doing all these calculations? It's also so hot and enervating here. How is he so calm and unflappable? So this is just a glimpse into how calculations were being done by the scholars, how they would chant something, and maybe in that chanting there was a formula, and then they would move something around, the shells around, and then they would do some workings which would give the timings. Of course, Le Gentil later understood how this Brahmin did it, but then he said that this is something I cannot do. I cannot do it in this method, because if I were to use this method, I would bungle up somewhere, and then I'll not be able to go back and correct my mistake, because they erase the number that they have come up with, and then they move on to the next set of calculations. So he said, I will not be able to retain so much in my head as this Brahmin is doing. He makes no mistake, but I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. So let him do it his way, and we will do it our way. There were mainly 4 pedagogical tools that I gathered from the way that the different disciplines were being taught. One was the games method that was used. I mean, these are not the only 4 tools. I'm just giving you a glimpse of 4 different tools. Apart from this, there were many, many more. games were used to teach a lot of things. So this is a board of snakes and ladders, which most of you would know. But the way it used to be played in India is that each of the squares would have some value written on it, some moral value. And so if a student landed on a square with a positive value like honesty, then the student would go up a ladder into a higher square, higher number. And if he or she landed on a square with some negative quality like jealousy or anger, then they would slide down the snake and come to a lower number. So in this way, games were being used to teach moral values, but there were many, many other games, like chess was used to teach strategy and many other things. Then playing cards also originated in India. Stories were used to teach a lot of things. Memory training was extremely important, an important part of education, because you would not even get into the top universities of India if your memory was not good. And debate was also an important pedagogical tool. So stories, India was a civilization that understood the power of storytelling. We know about the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Puranas, songs, we know dance, drama, puppet shows, paintings. All these are basically the underpinning of stories, right? Movies also, which have come later on, these are all just storytelling. So short stories and fables from the Panchatantra, Hitopadesha, and Jataka tales, they used talking animals to impart practical wisdom. Later, when the students would learn all these stories during their elementary period, elementary education, primary education, they would know all these stories. But the true significance of these stories would be learned when they went into advanced education, because that is when they would know what was the deeper significance of these stories, and that would make them appreciate that subject even more. I also think that these stories were teaching them to appreciate the subject, to arouse an interest in the subject. Now, the Panchatantra stories traveled around the world. They were copied and modified. They influenced narratives such as Aesop's fables, which have been influenced by the Panchatantra stories that came from India. Aesop was a slave in ancient Greece, and he came from Asia, and that is where he brought the stories from. And you will see the stories coming in all disciplines. So different subjects were being taught via stories. So, the months of a year, the calendar months, you will find some story explaining to the student how that story would tell them what those months were. Now, here I just want to dwell a little bit on memory training, which was very important, as I told you. You could not get into any important university. You would not pass the admission test if your memory was poor. And today we know that there is a superior learning curve when memory is enhanced. So Yi Jing was a Chinese student who visited India. Which century was that? I think it was in the 8th or 9th century. And he has written about the extraordinary memory and intellectual capacity of the Brahmanas. He's talked about, he's just amazing how they remember so many things. And later on, we hear the European travelers talking about the excellent memories of even the common people of India. Common people such as the laundry man, the dhobi, who takes clothes from different households to wash them and then return them back. How he knows exactly which household has given which clothes. So he has a way of remembering all that. He has some kind of numeral way of classifying them. Now, the Vedas, as we know, are the source of all the knowledge that we have in India. And we believe that all knowledge came from the Vedas. The Vedas were chanted in 11 distinct ways, and this helped to remember them. So there would be the Samhita Patha, where each word would be just said one after the other, like, A, B, C, D, E, F, just to give you an example. Then there was Pada Patha, where there would be pauses after each of the words. Like, let's assume A is a word and B is a word, C is a word. Then in Pada Patha, there'd be A, B, C, so there'll be a pause. And then there was Krama Patha, where the students were chanting in a manner like A, B, B, C, C, D, and so on. The Jata Patha, which was like A, B, B, A, B, B, C, C, B, B, C, C, D. So you can see Jata, it's getting more and more complex. Shikha Patha was more complex. Dvaja Patha, Danda Patha, Ratha Patha, Ghana Patha was the most complicated. And when the students went to the final, the final year, when they had come to when they had almost finished their education, that is when they would be learning the Ghana Patha, which would be A, B, B, A, B, C, C, B, A, and so on. It's a very long sequence. And when they learned all this, they would learn the Vedas so perfectly that there's no chance of forgetting it. And even if you write it down and you lose the script, the manuscript, it would be in your head. So this is very important because this is how orally so much of knowledge was passed down. So they were learning in the shlokas, they were learning the different ways of chanting in a musical way sometimes, and that way it would be embedded in the memory, and then it would be taught to the next generation, along with the meanings as well. So the Sanskrit effect is a very important study, which some of you might know. It was done by an Italian scholar, and it showed how there is cognitive improvement caused by Sanskrit chanting. So the brains of the Sanskrit scholars were examined, the ones who were chanting for a long time, and they found that the cognitive portion had expanded. Now, another example from the memory training method, which some of you would know, the Katapayadi method, whereby, each of the alphabets, each of the letters of the alphabet, K, K, G, G, would be assigned a number from 1 to 9, 1 to 0. And so the poetry would be composed using these letters, and they would actually be conveying a mathematical formula or something else. It would actually be mathematics, but in the form of letters. And to give you an example, here is this verse, right? Bhadram buddhi siddha janma ganita shraddha sma yad bhupagihi. And in this is encoded the value of pi, right? So from right to left, all of these, these are actually representing numbers. And then there are rules like, vowels such as e, they're assigned the value of 0 and so on. And that's how this verse gives you the value of pi, 3.1415, up to 17 decimals. Then you will find poetry which give the value of pi up to 30 decimals and so on. The interesting thing is that this is poetry, actually. If you do not know the mathematical significance of it, this would be actually a verse chanted for Krishna or for Shiva or any other deity from the pantheon. But then there would also be, it would be a mathematical formula. So this is the beauty. Imagine the prowess of a mathematician who has to compose poetry, which is meaningful in the sense of poetry, but it is also conveying a mathematical formula. So this was a very different kind of skill that they had. And now I come to debate. The Indian civilization fostered a strong spirit of rational inquiry. So students were required to observe physical phenomena very closely and apply rules of logic to speculate on their causes. So, the sun rises and the sun sets, the change of seasons, all of these things were understood by applying the rules of logic. Or, things like if there is a fire if there is smoke in a mountain, does it mean that there is fire in it? So these were the things that the logical rules were made, if and but and all those things. Debate was an integral tool for learning in ancient times, which is evident from references to Tarka Vidya. Tarka Vidya was the science and art of logic and debate, and we find reference to this discipline being taught in Ramayana, Mahabharata, Skanda Purana, Yajnavalkya Samhita. Various ancient Sanskrit texts, we find references to the science of debate, which is being taught. Okay. So the kings often organized intellectual tournaments where superior knowledge, debating prowess, and public speaking skills were highly esteemed and generously rewarded. So the winners of debate tournaments would be taken in a chariot around the city to tell people that these are your role models. These are the people you should be learning from, the people who speak so eloquently and are able to argue so logically. And in fact, there was a university in Bengal called Nadia University, where the professors were hired on the basis of their debating skills. See, all the teachers who wanted to become professors at that institute had to take part in a debate, and there would be judges who would then pick the best of them to teach in that university. So when we talk about India's educational legacy, we must remember that the thinkers from ancient India, such as Kanada, Sushruta, Charaka, Aryabhatta, Varahamira, Brahmagupta, Bhaskaracharya, Panini, Patanjali, Pingala, Bharata, and so many others have left a profound and enduring influence on many disciplines that we are still pursuing today. So I mentioned all these names because we must always have a permanent sense of gratitude towards these gurus who gave their life to learning, encoding, and teaching. So the discoveries and innovations from India in math, sciences, medicine, language, art, music, philosophy, water management, many other disciplines, they have laid the groundwork for modern knowledge. Nowadays, there is a noticeable trend towards studying Indian knowledge system. So we are seeing this acknowledgement coming, starting from India, which is important because India herself had lost her connection with these gurus. And so there is a growing interest in India's ancient knowledge systems because they are still very relevant today, or they can be repurposed for today. Now, this is a graphic that I have in my book. Very briefly, just to tell you how Indian knowledge went to other parts of the world. So I have, this is the longest chapter in my book. I would encourage you to read it. It talks about how the light of knowledge went from India to Greece and Egypt, went to Europe, went to Persia, West Asia, Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and so on. And I've given examples of all those things and also the route by which it went, because many times it went through the Silk Route, where, through the very route through which spices and other things were being exported out of India, manuscripts are also going through those routes. So we have the interesting things like Charaka's oath, what we call as the Hippocratic oath that is taken by doctors. If you go back and look into what India was doing, we had the Charaka's oath long before Hippocrates, and Charaka's oath is similar to it. I mean, it is in fact more detailed, more expanded, and the Hippocratic oath is a very abridged version of the oath that Indian doctors were taking before treating their patients. And lots of other things. So concept of sentience of animals, this went from India to the rest of the world. The fact that the understanding that animals also have feelings, that they have sentience, they have a soul, and which is as important as our soul. Then the concept of the 7 notes of music, various other things seem to have traveled out of India, going by the antiquity of Indian knowledge. So the question comes that if we had so much knowledge in India, what happened? Why was there a mess in later years? Well, that's because there was a period of time when India was invaded and the universities were destroyed. So this is an illustration from Hutchinson's Story of the Nations, which shows Muhammad Bakhtiar Khilji when he invaded India, and the major universities that I mentioned, Nalanda, Vikramshila, all these were destroyed in one fall swoop, and they were all destroyed. And the bodies of the scholars lying strewn around was described actually by the historians of those time. And so the library was burnt in Nalanda, books were destroyed, scholars were fleeing the universities with their manuscripts to the extent possible, and that is how knowledge simply got scattered. And after that painful period of history when Indian universities were destroyed, came the period of British imperialism when, as you can see in this cartoon from 1882, where Britain is like an octopus, which is grabbing land all over the world and colonizing them and fleecing them for taxes. And eventually, that the impoverishment of the people led to the drying up of the funding that was going to the schools and colleges. And that's how the native vernacular schools where all this mathematics was being taught, they all started closing down, and people gravitated towards an English medium education, which was mainly coming from Europe. The syllabus was from Europe, and the native indigenous knowledge systems were not given importance, and they started getting destroyed and damaged. So to just so to tell you about how what I have been doing ever since I wrote my book on India's educational heritage. So I went on a drive to find out whether there were any of those ancient gurukulas which were imparting knowledge in the ancient way. And then that led me to visit many gurukulas in India, and I was pleasantly surprised that even after all that destruction that happened, all the destruction during the Muslim period and the British period, there are still many gurukulas in India which are not well funded, but that they are doing their best to keep the Indian knowledge systems alive. So these are some of the gurukulas that I visited, Vedanidhi in Varanasi, Paramananda Ashram, and I was so delighted with this place called Vidyakshetra in Bengaluru, where I saw that it was a beautiful blend of the old and the new, the ancient ways of teaching clubbed with the modern methods. And, so a lot of these things are happening in India. I feel that there is a kind of a Gurukula revolution happening, where we are, because a lot of people are sick of the mainstream education, which is herding them together. The students are not really thinking innovatively. They are not really opening up their mind. And there are lots of mental health issues. So to resolve those things, the Gurukulas are doing this work of combining the ancient and the new to bring out these new batch of scholars who are extremely talented. So when I went to Vishnugupta Vishwa Vidyapitha in Gokarna, this is a beautiful mountainous location in the state of Karnataka. And you can see all these students who are learning astronomy from the teacher who is sitting over there, the Acharya. And I was very surprised to find that without a board, they were actually understanding without a whiteboard or a blackboard. The teacher through his words is explaining to them and they are understanding so many things. Of course, they did have classrooms with boards and everything, but they also had these kind of sessions. Then I went to Vidyaranya Gurukula in Telangana, where I saw the students are learning chess as a part of their curriculum. Apart from all that they were learning, this was a chess tournament that I saw. Then Vidya Kshetra, which I mentioned earlier, this is in the outskirts of Bengaluru. So this is a tabla class that I witnessed, and I went to various other classes. It was just amazing the way science was being taught in a very rooted way. So the contributions of Indian scientists and mathematicians was being given, and the way they learned it was being taught, and then the European way of teaching also was being brought in. So I hope I didn't take too much time. This is my book, which if you want to buy, these are the details. You can scan here to order my book. And you can also reach me through email, sahana.singh@gmail.com. And I'm on Twitter, Facebook, not so much on Instagram. But please feel free to connect with me if you have any questions or suggestions. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sahana ji. James, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. That was truly wonderful. Very comprehensive view of this really immense area, immense subject. And you've obviously done a huge amount of research and study. And it's really brilliant to find out all these different attributes to traditional education in India. It's I have to say, I don't think I would be able to get into one of those forest universities. I don't think I would qualify. What was also very useful was to hear about the lack of argument, so to speak, between the spiritual and the rational, which is always in Europe has always been a bit of a bugbear and a difficult issue. Starting, well, for example, Galileo. And what's very clear in this traditional Indian education is, well, it's not just in ancient times. It's there in the present day as well. This lack of argument is a good description between the spiritual and the rational. It was so good to hear about that as well.
Actually, one led to the other. So religion would lead to math, because if you want to do your ceremony perfectly, you need to have perfect squares and rectangles. So you need to know geometry, you need to know calculus, you need to know trigonometry, because you want the auspicious timings as well. So it's very interesting how that interplay happened. One was leading to the other.
And certainly these great Indian mathematicians, they were also astronomers.
Yes.
I mean, we do get some examples in Europe. I mean, for example, Sir Christopher Wren was very much a polymath. But the other thing that's interesting is how when you describe how learning a different discipline helps you to understand your own discipline. So I thought that was an excellent point to make. Anyway, thank you so much. That was lovely, Dr. Singh. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.